You protect her. She brings ruin to us all.
Tessaly, please, I meant no harm. Ottilie is innocent. Your anger is misplaced.
Innocent, she's a curse.
The corridors of Dawnfield Manor had never once shown mercy to the weak. Tessaly grips her worn bag tighter as the housekeeper leads her through the grand hallway on her very first morning. Marble floors, towering walls, portraits of cold, important faces staring down at nothing. She has never seen wealth this close before. She keeps her eyes forward and her breathing quiet. Then she hears it. Laughter, sharp and cruel, bouncing off stone walls. She turns the corner and stops. 3 servant girls surround a young girl seated in a wheelchair at the far end of the corridor. One snatches the book from her lap and flings it across the floor. Another grabs the handles of the wheelchair and spins it violently, laughing at the girl's helpless gasps. The third leans down, says something directly into her ear, and the girl's face breaks completely. Tears spill. Her hands grip the armrests so tightly her knuckles go pale. Not a single person in that hallway intervenes. The footman looks away. The senior maid busies herself with folding. Everyone pretends they see nothing. Tessaly has been inside this manor for less than 2 hours. She has no rank, no allies, no safety net. She needs this position more than she has ever needed anything. She drops her bag and walks straight toward them. She steps between the girls and the wheelchair, picks the book off the floor, and sets it gently back in the girl's lap. Then she turns and faces all 3 of them without flinching. Dead silence. The girl in the wheelchair looks up at Tessaly like she is seeing something she had long stopped believing in. Tessaly does not know this girl's name yet. She does not know whose blood runs through her veins. She does not know that a duke walks these same halls, that this one morning will crack her entire world open and rewrite every plan she ever made for her life. All she knows is that something wrong was happening and she could not walk past it. Would you have done the same, or would fear have kept your feet still? Drop your answer below and tell us the most beautiful part of the world you are watching from. If this story already has your heart, hit subscribe right now because what comes next will completely shake you.
Dawnfield Manor, my new beginning. I must be ready for what awaits. Let this be my path.
The morning Tessaly Bryn arrived at Dawnfield Manor, the sky was the color of ash and the wind had teeth. She had walked 4 miles to get there. Her boots were thin, her coat was thinner, and the letter of employment folded inside her pocket had been read so many times the creases were nearly tears. She had no connections, no references from any house of standing, and no family left to fall back on. What she had was a name written at the bottom of that letter, the name of a housekeeper who had agreed, reluctantly, to give her a trial week. 1 week to prove she belonged. She stopped at the iron gates and looked up. Dawnfield Manor rose from the earth like something that had always been there and always intended to stay. Stone walls darkened by years of weather. Windows tall and narrow, like eyes watching without expression. Ivy climbed the east wing with slow, quiet determination. The whole estate breathed a kind of authority that needed no announcement. It simply existed, and everything around it adjusted accordingly. Tessaly straightened her spine, picked up her worn bag, and walked through the gates. The housekeeper, Mrs. Portham, met her at the servants' entrance. She was a woman built entirely from sharp edges. Sharp jaw, sharp eyes, sharp voice that cut before it even finished a sentence. She looked Tessaly over the way a merchant examines something she suspects is damaged goods. "You are late," Mrs. Portham said. "I walked," Tessaly replied. "I did not ask how you arrived. I said you are late." Tessaly said nothing further. She had learned early in life that certain battles cost more than they were worth, and this one, on her very first morning, was not worth a single breath. Mrs. Portham handed her a uniform, pointed her toward a narrow room she would share with 2 other maids, and gave her exactly 10 minutes to change and report to the main corridor for her first assignment. Tessaly changed in 8. The 2 maids she would share the room with were already dressed and ready to leave when she arrived. The first one, a tall girl with a flat expression, introduced herself as Greta. She gave Tessaly one long look and then looked away, as if the assessment had already been completed and the result was unimpressive. The second maid, a rounder, softer girl named Polly, offered a small smile that seemed genuine enough but disappeared quickly when Greta cleared her throat. Tessaly noted both of them carefully and said nothing. The main corridor of Dawnfield Manor was a different world from the servants' quarters. The ceilings climbed high above the floor. Portraits lined the walls in heavy gilded frames. The carpet running the length of the hallway was thick and deep and absorbed every sound like a secret. Tessaly had been given a list of morning tasks and a bucket of cleaning supplies and told to begin at the east end and work her way toward the grand staircase without making noise, without touching anything on the display shelves, and without stopping for any reason. She started at the east end. She was halfway through her second task when she heard the wheels. A slow, uneven rolling sound coming from somewhere around the corner of the connecting corridor. Then a pause. Then the sound of something being said in a low, mean voice. Then laughter, the particular kind of laughter that is not about anything funny at all but about power, about the pleasure of making someone smaller. Tessaly set down her clothes. She turned the corner. At the far end of the connecting corridor, 3 girls had surrounded a young girl seated in a wheelchair. They were not guests. Their uniforms marked them as household staff, senior to Tessaly by the look of their dress, which meant they had been here longer and likely knew every room and every rule and every blind spot in this manor. The girl in the wheelchair was slight and pale, with dark hair pinned loosely at the back of her neck. Her hands rested in her lap with a kind of forced stillness, the stillness of someone who had learned not to reach out because reaching out only gave them more to take. A book lay on the floor several feet away, clearly thrown. One of the 3 girls was leaning over the wheelchair with both hands on the armrests, speaking close to the girl's face, and whatever she was saying was making the girl's jaw tighten and her eyes fill. The other 2 stood watching, arms folded, thoroughly entertained. Not one other person in that corridor moved. Tessaly felt something rise in her chest that she had no name for at that moment. It was not anger exactly, though anger was part of it. It was more like recognition. She knew what it felt like to be surrounded and outnumbered and to understand that no one was coming. She knew the specific weight of that knowledge. She walked forward. She did not run. She did not shout. She simply walked, steadily, directly, until she was standing between the 3 girls and the wheelchair. She bent down, picked the book up off the floor, and placed it gently back into the girl's lap. Then she stood straight and looked at the girl who had been leaning over the armrests. Silence arrived like a 4th person entering the room. "Move away," Tessaly said. Her voice was quiet. It was also completely serious. The girl who had been leaning straightened slowly. She was taller than Tessaly and had the particular confidence of someone who had never once been challenged in this hallway. Her name was Sefton, and she had been a senior maid at Dawnfield for 3 years. She looked Tessaly up and down with an expression caught somewhere between amusement and irritation. "And who exactly are you?" Sefton asked. "Someone who just told you to move away," Tessaly said. One of the other 2 girls, a sharp-faced one named Grusk, laughed once through her nose. Sefton did not laugh. Her expression shifted into something colder, more deliberate. "You have been here less than 1 morning," Sefton said slowly. "You have no rank, no standing, and apparently no sense. Walk away before you make a mistake you cannot fix." Tessaly did not move. She did not look away. And she did not speak again because she did not need to. She simply stood exactly where she was, between the wheelchair and the 3 of them, with the kind of stillness that communicated far more than words. Something passed across Sefton's face. It was brief and quickly covered, but it was there. A calculation, a reassessment. She straightened her collar, exchanged a look with Grusk, and then turned and walked away down the corridor. The other two followed. Their footsteps faded. The corridor returned to quiet. Tessaly exhaled slowly and turned to face the girl in the wheelchair. Up close, she could see that the girl's eyes were dark brown and very bright. The kind of brightness that comes not from happiness but from intelligence and from the habit of observing everything very carefully. Her jaw was still tight. The book was pressed against her chest now, held there with both hands. "Are you hurt?" Tessaly asked. The girl looked at her for a long moment without answering, as though she was trying to determine whether kindness from a stranger was something she was permitted to trust. "No," the girl said finally. Her voice was soft but precise. "Not in any way that will show." That answer settled into Tessaly's chest and stayed there. "I am Tessaly," she said. "I arrived this morning." "I know," the girl said. "I saw you come through the gates from my window." Tessaly looked at her. "What is your name?" The girl hesitated, just briefly. Then she said, "Ottilie."
Another day, another hallway to tend to. These portraits have seen better days.
Nobody told Tessaly that Ottilie existed. That in itself was strange. In any large household, the servants knew everything. Who slept where, who ate what, who arrived and who departed. Information moved through the staff quarters faster than any formal announcement ever could. But in the 3 days between Tessaly receiving her letter of employment and arriving at Dawnfield Manor, not one word had been spoken to her about a girl in a wheelchair living somewhere inside this estate. She turned that over in her mind as she returned to her morning tasks, working her way down the corridor with careful, methodical movements. Around her, the manor continued its morning rhythm, footsteps on upper floors, the distant clatter from the kitchens below, the occasional voice of someone giving instruction. Everything ordinary, everything proceeding as though nothing had happened in that connecting corridor at all. But something had happened. Tessaly knew it. She could still feel the weight of Sefton's stare on the back of her neck, and she could still hear the particular flatness in Ottilie's voice when she said "not in any way that will show." Those words belonged to someone who had been hurt many times before. At midday, Tessaly reported to the kitchen for her break alongside 6 other maids. The kitchen was large and warm, smelling of bread and hot broth, and the cook, a wide woman named Berta who appeared to operate on organized chaos and strong opinions, moved between the stoves with the authority of someone who considered herself the true ruler of Dawnfield Manor regardless of whatever the official hierarchy had to say about it. Tessaly sat at the far end of the long wooden table and listened more than she spoke. This was her method in any new place. Speak little. Observe much. Let others reveal themselves before you reveal anything of yourself. Greta sat 2 seats away and did not look at her once. Polly sat directly across and kept glancing up with the expression of someone who wanted to say something but could not decide whether it was safe. Tessaly waited. Eventually Polly leaned forward and lowered her voice. "I saw what you did this morning." Tessaly looked at her evenly. "Did you? With Sefton and the others?" "Near the east corridor." Polly wrapped both hands around her cup. "Nobody does that. Nobody has ever done that." "Someone should have," Tessaly said simply. Polly was quiet for a moment. Then she said even more quietly, "You should be careful. Sefton has been here longer than most. Mrs. Portham listens to her." "I will keep that in mind," Tessaly said. She meant it, not as a surrender but as information. Knowing where the danger lives is not the same as retreating from it. What she did not say to Polly, what she kept entirely to herself, was the question that had been sitting at the back of her thoughts since the corridor. Who was Ottilie? not in the casual sense of wanting to know her story, but in the more specific sense of wondering why a girl with that bearing, that precision of speech, that particular way of holding herself even in distress, was living in a manor like Dawnfield without anyone apparently acknowledging her presence. She did not belong to the staff. Her hands were unmarked by work. Her clothing was fine, quiet but fine, the kind that does not announce itself but reveals itself on closer inspection through the quality of the stitching and the weight of the fabric. And the way she had looked at Tessaly after the confrontation, not with gratitude exactly, but with a careful, measured curiosity, as though she was deciding something important. That was not the look of a servant girl. Tessaly finished her meal, returned to her duties, and said nothing further about any of it. The afternoon passed in hard work. She scrubbed, carried, polished, fetched, and followed every instruction given to her without complaint. Mrs. Portham appeared twice to inspect her progress and said nothing either time, which Tessaly chose to interpret as provisional approval. By late afternoon, the light inside the manor had gone golden and long, stretching across the corridor floors in quiet columns. Tessaly was collecting a set of cleaned candle holders from the supply room near the east wing when she heard the wheels again. She stepped into the doorway. Tessaly was moving her wheelchair slowly down the corridor alone, carrying a small leather journal pressed to her side. She had not seen Tessaly yet. Her eyes were forward, her jaw set with the particular determination of someone covering a distance they find difficult without wanting anyone to witness the difficulty. Then she looked up and stopped. They regarded each other for a moment. "You are still here," Tessaly said. It was not quite a greeting and not quite a question. "I am," Tessaly said. "Were you expecting otherwise?" Something moved briefly across Tessaly's face. "Sefton has removed 3 maids before you, all of them within their first week." Tessaly stepped out of the doorway and leaned against the wall with her arms loosely folded. How did she manage that? Complaints to Mrs. Portham. Small things mostly. A broken item. A missed task. Something that could not be disproved. Tessaly paused. She is very patient about it. She waits until the maid is comfortable and then moves. Tessaly absorbed this carefully. "You have watched this happen 3 times. "Yes. And you never said anything to anyone?" Tessaly's expression shifted into something that was difficult to read, several emotions pressing against each other behind very controlled features. "Who would I say it to?" That question landed with more weight than it appeared to carry on the surface. Tessaly looked at her steadily. "You could say it to me." Tessaly looked back at her with those bright, careful eyes. Something in the girl's posture changed, not relaxing exactly, more like a tiny shift in the angle of her guard, the kind that happens when a person hears something unexpected and honest. "I do not know you," Tessaly said. "No," Tessaly agreed. "But you watched me come through the gates this morning, and you watched what happened in the corridor, and you are here talking to me now. So you have already decided something." A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, more like the silence before something important is said. Then from somewhere above them, from the upper floors, a door opened. Heavy, deliberate. The sound of it moved through the manor like a stone dropped into still water. Tessaly's entire posture changed in an instant. She straightened in her chair, pressed the journal tighter to her side, and glanced upward with an expression that was half instinct and half something that looked almost like fear. "I have to go," she said quickly. "Wait," Tessaly said. "Whose door was that?" Tessaly had already begun moving her wheelchair back down the corridor. She glanced over her shoulder only once, and what Tessaly saw in her face in that single moment was not the look of a girl who was simply late for something. It was the look of a girl who knew exactly whose footsteps were about to come down those stairs, and who had very specific reasons for not being found here. Tessaly stood completely still and listened. The footsteps came down the grand staircase slowly, measured. each one deliberate, as though the person descending had no reason to hurry and never had. The sound filled the corridor and gathered weight as it approached. And then he appeared at the base of the stairs. Tall, dark-coated, a face that was not handsome in any comfortable way but striking in the way that certain things are striking because they carry an intensity that makes it difficult to look elsewhere. He could not have been more than 30, but he moved like someone who had already made every important decision about who he was and saw no reason to revisit any of them. His eyes swept the corridor. They landed on Tessaly. She did not look away. He said nothing. Neither did she. Then his gaze moved to the far end of the corridor, to the spot where Tessaly had been, now empty. Something shifted in his expression. A tightening around the jaw, a brief compression of the lips that could have meant many things. He looked back at Tessaly once more. "You are new," he said. His voice was low and even. "Yes," she said. "What is your name?" "Tessaly Bryn." He held her gaze for exactly 3 more seconds. Then he turned and walked in the direction Tessaly had gone, without another word, without looking back. Tessaly stood in the corridor alone, candle holders still in her arms, heart beating steadily, and understood with absolute clarity that she had just met someone whose name she did not yet know, but whose presence had just changed the temperature of everything.
Miss Tessaly, do you think the mistress will be pleased today? She will be if all is perfect, Polly. She's so demanding. Then we must not falter.
His name was Duke Rennick Vale. Tessaly learned it the way she learned everything in that manor. Not from anyone who intended to tell her, but from the careful silences that fell whenever his name came near, the way the entire staff rearranged themselves slightly whenever he moved through a room, like a tide responding to something it could not resist and did not question. Duke Rennick Vale, master of Dawnfield Manor, unmarried, unyielding, the kind of man whose presence did not announce itself loudly but settled into every room he entered and remained there long after he had gone. On the morning of her 4th day, Tessaly was assigned to polish the silver in the dining room alongside Polly. It was quiet work, methodical, and it gave Polly enough comfort to talk, which was exactly what Tessaly had been waiting for. "How long has Tessaly been here?" Tessaly asked, keeping her voice casual, her hands moving steadily over a candlestick. Polly glanced at the door before answering. "Always. She was born here. Well, born in the family townhouse, but she has lived here since she was small." Another glance at the door. "After the accident." Tessaly looked up. "What accident?" Polly pressed her lips together as though she had already said more than she intended. "Nobody talks about it. Not directly. Only that she was very young, and after it, she could not walk and the Duke has been." She paused, searching for the word. "Protective. Very protective. Sometimes protective in ways that feel more like." Another pause. "Walls." Tessaly set the candlestick down and picked up another. "And the staff? How do they treat her?" Polly said nothing, which was its own answer. The silver polishing ended. The morning continued, and Tessaly returned to her corridor duties carrying the weight of what had not been said more than what had. She was working near the base of the grand staircase just before midday when it happened. A crash, enormous and irreversible, tore through the silence of the manor like a stone through glass. Every head turned. Everybody on the ground floor stilled. Tessaly straightened and looked toward the sound. It had come from the Duke's private study at the end of the west corridor. The door was open, which was unusual because that door was never open. And standing just outside it, breathing hard, her face white as chalk, was Tessaly in her wheelchair. Tessaly moved without thinking. She reached Tessaly in seconds. Inside the study, visible through the open door, an enormous oak writing desk had been cleared. Papers were scattered across the floor in wide arcs. An inkwell had shattered against the wall, leaving a dark, spreading stain across the pale wallpaper. A glass cabinet along the far wall had toppled, and the contents, letters, ledgers, a row of small framed portraits, lay broken and scattered across the floor. And in the middle of all of it, sitting untouched on the floor as though it had been deliberately placed there rather than fallen, was a single silver letter opener. The Duke's, monogrammed, unmistakable. Tessaly looked at Ottilie. What happened? Ottilie's breathing was shallow and fast. I came to return a book I had borrowed months ago. The door was already open. I wheeled inside and the desk. She stopped, shook her head. Something was wrong with it already. The leg was cracked. When my will caught the edge of the rug, it shifted and everything. She gestured helplessly at the destruction around her. Behind them, footsteps were already gathering. Mrs. Portham arrived first, then Greta, then four other maids crowding the corridor entrance, and behind them, moving through the crowd with a stillness that parted people automatically, came Sefton. Sefton looked at the study. She looked at Ottilie. She looked at Tessaly standing beside the wheelchair. And then, very slowly, a terrible calm settled across her face. She was in here alone, Sefton said. Not to anyone specific. To the room. To the gathering staff. The new maid and the young mistress. Alone in His Grace's private study. I was in the corridor, Tessaly said clearly. I came to the door when I heard the crash. That is not what I saw, Sefton said. Tessaly looked at her. Then what did you see? I saw you coming out of that study when the crash had already happened. Sefton's voice was measured and sorrowful, perfectly performed. I saw you with your hands at your sides and that. She pointed to the letter opener on the floor. Already there. A murmur moved through the gathered maids like wind through dry grass. She is lying, Ottilie said sharply. Every face turned to Ottilie with the specific discomfort of people who did not know whether they were permitted to believe her. Mrs. Portham stepped forward. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were calculating rapidly. This is a very serious matter. His Grace's private study. His personal documents. His property. She looked at Tessaly with the careful precision of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. Until His Grace returns and this is properly examined, you will be confined to the servants' quarters. On whose authority? Tessaly asked. Mine, Mrs. Portham said flatly. I did nothing, Tessaly said. Not defensively. Simply and directly, looking Mrs. Portham in the eye without blinking. That will be determined, Mrs. Portham replied. Sefton was watching all of it from the side with that terrible calm still arranged across her face, and beside her, Grusk was nodding slowly, and behind Grusk, Greta had folded her arms, and every maid in that corridor had already shifted, barely perceptibly but unmistakably, away from Tessaly and toward the majority. Away from the accused and toward the accusers. Every one of them except Polly, who stood at the very back of the group with her hands clasped and her face full of something that looked like the very specific agony of someone who knows the truth and is terrified of it. Tessaly looked at Ottilie once before she turned to go. Ottilie looked back at her with those dark, bright eyes, and what was in them was not helplessness. It was furious, quiet, contained, and absolute. She was wheeling forward before anyone could stop her. Nobody is confining her anywhere, Ottilie said. Her voice had changed entirely. Gone was the soft precision. What replaced it was something with iron running through its center. I was in that study. I witnessed exactly what happened. Tessaly Bryn did not touch a single object in that room, and anyone who says otherwise is a liar standing in my brother's house. And I will say so to my brother's face the moment he returns. The corridor went completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Sefton's terrible calm cracked. Just slightly. Just at the edges. But enough to see beneath it. Mrs. Portham cleared her throat. "The matter will await His Grace's return," she said, in a tone that had quietly surrendered a significant portion of its earlier authority. Everyone return to your duties. The crowd dispersed, slowly, with the particular reluctance of people who had been hoping to witness something conclusive and had instead been denied it. Tessaly and Tessaly were left alone in the corridor outside the ruined study. "Thank you," Tessaly said quietly. "Do not thank me," Tessaly said. Her hands were trembling slightly on the wheels of her chair, the only visible evidence of how much that had cost her. "I told the truth. That is all." But Tessaly knew, and Tessaly knew, that in this household, telling the truth had never once been all. Duke Rennick Vale returned to Dawnfield Manor the following evening. Tessaly heard the carriage before she heard anything else. The crunch of wheels on gravel, the sharp call of the stable hand, the heavy sound of the front doors opening. She was in the servants' hall with the other maids at the time, and the atmosphere in that room changed the moment those sounds reached it. Backs straightened, conversations dropped. Hands that had been idle found sudden and urgent tasks. Tessaly kept her eyes on her mending and her ears on everything. He had been gone for 3 days on an estate business. 3 days during which the destroyed study had been left exactly as it was, door locked, by Mrs. Portham's direct order. 3 days during which Sefton had moved through the household with the particular satisfaction of someone who believes they have already won and is simply waiting for the paperwork. 3 days during which Tessaly had been watched constantly, her every movement noted, her every interaction observed and likely reported. She had said very little, done her work, and waited. The night passed without summons. The following morning arrived gray and heavy, the sky pressing low over the manor grounds. Tessaly was carrying fresh water to the upper east corridor when she rounded the corner and found Sefton, Grusk, and 2 other maids she knew only by sight blocking the hallway in a loose line. Not aggressive in posture. Worse than that, arranged, deliberate, the kind of blockade that knows exactly what it is doing and has dressed it in the clothing of accident. "His Grace has asked to see you," Sefton said. Tessaly looked at her. "Then I will go to him." "He has asked that we bring you," Sefton said. "I do not need to be brought anywhere," Tessaly said. "I know where the study is." "The new study," Sefton said. "He is using the east drawing room while his study is." Pause, deliberate and waited. Restored. Tessaly set her water pail down against the wall and smoothed her apron. She followed Sefton without another word, and the 2 other maids fell in behind her, and she understood with complete clarity that this had been arranged to look, to anyone watching, like an escort rather than a guard. The east drawing room was large and lined with bookshelves. A fire had been lit. Duke Rennick stood at the far window with his back to the room and his hands clasped behind him, looking out at the grounds below. He did not turn immediately when they entered. Sefton announced her. "Miss Bryn, Your Grace." "Leave us," he said. A pause from Sefton that lasted precisely 1 second too long. Then the door closed. He turned. Tessaly had prepared herself for many versions of this conversation. She had not prepared herself for his face, which was not the controlled, unreadable thing it had been in the corridor. It was still composed, but there was something behind it that had not been there before. Something that looked, unexpectedly, like exhaustion. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Sit down, Miss Bryn." She sat. He did not. He moved away from the window and stood near the fireplace, and for a moment he simply looked at the fire as though it required his full attention. "My sister spent 2 hours with me last night," he said. Tessaly waited. "She told me everything." He paused. "Not only the incident in the study. Everything. From before you arrived. From 2 years before you arrived." Another pause, longer, during which the fire crackled and the wind moved against the windows. I was not aware of the full extent of what has been happening in this household. I know, Tessaly said quietly. He looked at her sharply. Tessaly told me, Tessaly said, that she had been protecting you from knowing. Something crossed his face that was difficult to look at directly. It passed quickly but left a mark in the quality of his expression. The way a storm leaves the air different even after it has gone. She should not have had to protect me from anything, he said. She should have been the one being protected. Tessaly said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would help, and she understood that. Some truths simply needed to be sat with for a moment before anything useful could follow. He turned fully toward her. Tell me what you saw. From the beginning. Your own account. Not filtered through anyone else. She told him, clearly, in order, without embellishment. The corridor on her first morning, the three girls in the wheelchair, Sefton's warning, the substance on the baseboard that she had nearly missed, the wet floor at the staircase, the study and what she saw and what she did not do. She told him about Polly's small kindness and Greta's silent allegiance to Sefton. She told him about the way the staff had turned in the corridor, the almost imperceptible but unmistakable shift of bodies away from her. He listened without interrupting once. When she finished, the room was very quiet. There is one thing I need to ask you, he said. Ask it, she said. Why did you involve my sister? You could have come to me directly. You could have found a way. Tessaly met his gaze squarely. I could not come to you with words alone and nothing behind them. You would have heard a new maid making accusations against long-standing staff, and you would have investigated, and during that investigation Sefton would have dismantled everything before it could be proven. I needed someone whose account could not be questioned. Someone whose position in this house is unassailable. She paused. I needed Tessaly to choose to speak. I could not make that choice for her. He was quiet for a long moment. You were protecting her as well, he said slowly, by letting her decide. She has had very few decisions made available to her in this house, Tessaly said. That one belonged to her. Something happened to his expression then. It was not the small crack she had seen at the corridor window 2 days ago. It was larger than that, a shift in the whole architecture of his face, as though something that had been held at a fixed angle for a very long time had moved, just slightly, just enough. He looked away. Sefton, Grusk, and 2 others will be dismissed today, he said. Their references will reflect the grounds for dismissal. Mrs. Portham will be replaced within the fortnight. He stopped. That is not sufficient. I know that. But it is what I can do immediately. It is enough for now, Tessaly said. He looked back at her. My sister has asked that you be kept on permanently, with better duties and better wages. I heard something similar the last time a decision was being made about me, Tessaly said carefully. I would prefer to know what you have decided, not only what has been requested. He held her gaze. I have decided, he said slowly, that Dawnfield Manor has not seen someone like you before. A pause. And that I am not yet certain what to do with that. The fire shifted in the grate. Outside, the wind pressed against the glass. Tessaly stood, smoothed her apron, and met his eyes one final time. Then I will give you time to decide, Your Grace. She walked to the door. Miss Bryn. She stopped but did not turn. My sister trusts you, he said quietly. She has not trusted anyone in this house in a very long time. Tessaly stood with her hand on the door frame for a moment. Then she said, without turning, she was right to wait for someone worth trusting. She walked out. Behind her, in the east drawing room, Duke Rennick Vale stood alone by the fire for a long time after she had gone. And the question on his face was not about the dismissed staff or the ruined study or the household that needed rebuilding. It was about a girl who had arrived with a worn bag and a desperate need for wages and had somehow, in the space of 1 week, changed the entire temperature of everything he thought he understood about his own home. And somewhere in the East Wing, a wheelchair moved quietly down a sunlit corridor, and for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, Tessaly was not moving away from something. She was moving toward it. 3 days after the dismissals, Dawnfield Manor felt like a held breath finally released. Sefton was gone. Grusk was gone. The 2 others who had stood silently complicit in every act of cruelty were gone. Mrs. Portham had been stripped of her authority over the upper floors and moved to administrative duties in the lower household, where she sat with the shrunken posture of someone who had gambled everything on the wrong hand and was still calculating how it had happened. The remaining staff moved differently now. Quieter, more careful, not afraid exactly, but aware, the way people become aware when they understand that the rules they thought were decorative have turned out to have teeth. Polly had not stopped apologizing to Tessaly since the morning after the drawing room meeting. She apologized over breakfast. She apologized in the linen corridor. She apologized so thoroughly and so repeatedly that Tessaly finally put a hand on her arm and said, firmly but kindly, "You were afraid. Fear is not a crime. Stop punishing yourself and simply do better from here." Polly had burst into tears immediately, which was not what Tessaly had intended. But the matter was settled after that. Greta remained. She had not participated directly in any of Sefton's schemes, had only stood at a distance and watched with that flat, unreadable expression. There was nothing provable against her, and Tessaly had said so honestly when the Duke asked. But Greta knew that Tessaly had said so, and the knowledge of it sat between them like an unpaid debt, uncomfortable and unresolved. Tessaly paid it no particular attention. She had other things to attend to. The new housekeeper arrived on a Tuesday. Her name was Mrs. Dunwick, a brisk, clear-eyed woman in her 50s who had come from a large house in the north and carried with her the particular competence of someone who had managed difficult households before and found them more interesting than easy ones. She interviewed every member of the remaining staff individually, made 3 immediate changes to the daily schedule, reorganized the supply cupboards, and within 48 hours had established herself so completely that it felt as though she had always been there. On her second morning, she stopped Tessaly in the corridor and looked at her directly. "You are the one who started all of this," Mrs. Dunwick said. "It was not an accusation. It was an assessment. Something was already happening before I arrived," Tessaly said. "I only made it visible." Mrs. Dunwick studied her for a moment. "His Grace speaks well of you. His sister speaks better," Tessaly said. Something that might have been approval moved briefly across Mrs. Dunwick's face. "Yes," she said. "I have met Miss Tessaly. She is remarkable." A pause. "She has been very alone in this house for a very long time." "I know," Tessaly said. "See that she is less so," Mrs. Dunwick said, and walked away. It was the closest thing to an official assignment Tessaly had received that was not written on any list or attached to any formal duty. But she took it as seriously as anything that had ever been handed to her. She and Tessaly had developed a rhythm over those first unsettled days, quiet and unannounced. The kind of friendship that builds not through grand gestures but through small, consistent ones. Tessaly would bring Tessaly's morning tea and stay for 20 minutes. Tessaly would read aloud from whatever she was currently absorbed in, and Tessaly would listen while she straightened the room, and sometimes she would disagree with something Tessaly read and say so plainly, and Tessaly would argue back with the particular energy of someone who had had no one to argue with for years and found it enormously satisfying. They talked about many things. Books, the grounds below Tessaly's window that she watched through every season like a painting that kept changing. The village Tessaly had grown up in, its smallness, its specific kindnesses and specific cruelties. The way certain people are shaped by what they survive and others are broken by far less. They did not talk about Rennick. Not directly. but he was present in the conversation the way that certain subjects are present even when unspoken, because everything around them has been arranged in relation to them. Tessaly was aware of him the way she was aware of the weather. Something she did not control and could not predict but needed to account for in everything she planned. He had not spoken to her again since the drawing room. She had seen him several times at the end of corridors on the staircase, once in the entrance hall when she was crossing it with a stack of folded curtains and he was coming in from outside with cold air still on his coat. They had exchanged a look each time, measured, mutual, the kind of look that contains an entire conversation that has not yet been spoken aloud. She told herself it meant nothing. She was not entirely convinced. On the 9th day after the dismissals, everything cracked open again. It began with a letter. Tessaly was in Ottilie's room, setting out the afternoon tea things, when Ottilie opened an envelope that had been delivered with the morning post and held it for a long time without speaking. Tessaly set the teapot down and looked at her. Ottilie's face had gone the color of old paper. "What is it?" Tessaly asked. Ottilie held the letter out without a word. Tessaly took it and read it. It was short and signed, written in a careful, disguised hand that tried hard to appear uneducated but slipped twice into language too precise for the pretense to hold. It said, in its flat, terrible plainness, that Tessaly Bryn had not come to Dawnfield Manor by accident, that she had a history at her previous place of employment that had been deliberately concealed, that a valuable piece of jewelry had gone missing from a household in which she had worked 2 years prior, that if the Duke were to investigate, he would find that she had left that position not by choice but under a cloud of suspicion that had never formally resolved. None of it was true. Tessaly read it twice. Then she set it down on the table beside the teapot and stood very still. "Someone sent this," Ottilie said quietly. "Someone who knew exactly what to put in it." "Yes," Tessaly said. "Greta," Ottilie said. Not a question. Tessaly had reached the same conclusion within seconds of reading it. The letter was too well constructed. It knew too specifically which accusation would do the most damage. Missing jewelry in a previous household. It was exactly the kind of thing that could not be quickly disproven, that would require investigation, during which Tessaly's position would become untenable, during which doubt would grow in every room she entered. It was smarter than anything Sefton had tried. And that was because Greta was smarter than Sefton. She had always been smarter. She had simply had the patience to let Sefton go first and fall first and learn from it. "She has been planning this since the dismissals," Tessaly said. Ottilie's jaw was tight. "We need to go to Rennick now, before this letter reaches him through another channel." "It may already have," Tessaly said quietly. They looked at each other. "Then we go now anyway," Ottilie said. She turned her wheelchair toward the door with the decisiveness of someone who had spent too long being still and was finished with it. They found Duke Rennick in the east drawing room again, standing at the table this time with a spread of estate papers before him and 2 correspondence envelopes already opened beside them. He looked up when they entered, and his gaze moved from Ottilie to Tessaly and back with the rapid assessment of a man who has learned to read situations quickly. He held up one of the opened envelopes. "I received this an hour ago," he said. Tessaly stepped forward and held out the letter from Ottilie's room. "And we received this." He took it. "Read it." His expression did not change dramatically, but something along his jaw tightened in a way Tessaly had come to recognize as the outermost visible sign of a much larger internal response. "The same hand," he said. "Almost certainly," Tessaly said, with a deliberate effort to disguise it. "The accusation," he said carefully, "the jewelry, is false," Tessaly said, directly, without decoration. He looked at her. "I know," he said. She had not expected that. She had prepared herself to argue it, to explain it, to lay out her reasoning for why it could not be true. She had not prepared herself for 2 words delivered with such complete and unambiguous certainty. "You know," she repeated, "I had your previous employment investigated before you arrived," he said. "Before Mrs. Portham hired you, I have all new staff investigated. It is standard practice for this household." A pause. "Your record is entirely clean. Your previous employer, a Mrs. Holt of Carwick Village, described you in her account as the most honest girl she had employed in 30 years of housekeeping." The room was very quiet. Tessaly made a small sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob but lived somewhere between the two. "Then who sent it?" Tessaly asked. "I intend to find out today," he said. His voice had dropped into that lower register, the one that was not loud but carried an absolute finality. "But I have a strong suspicion." He looked at Tessaly steadily. "I want you to trust that I will handle this. Can you do that?" Tessaly held his gaze. "I have trusted very few people in my life, Your Grace." "I know," he said quietly. "I am asking anyway." Something moved through the room that had nothing to do with the letters or the investigation or the household politics that had consumed the past 2 weeks. Something much simpler and much more complicated than any of that. "Yes," Tessaly said, "I can do that." Greta confessed before sundown. Not willingly, not with any grace. But when Duke Rennick sat across from her in the east drawing room with both letters on the table between them and asked her, in that voice that left no useful hiding places, to explain the specific phrasing in the 2nd paragraph of the unsigned letter, the one that used a grammatical construction she had used twice in her own written household reports, the color left her face so completely and so suddenly that the confession was almost unnecessary. She had written both letters. She had planned the first, delivered it through a village boy paid to carry it to the manor post without knowing its contents, and had intended the second as a private follow-up she herself would show to Mrs. Portham before that woman had been stripped of authority. When Mrs. Portham's position collapsed, Greta had adapted. She had sent the letter directly, anonymously, hoping it would reach the Duke before Tessaly could mount any defense. She had not accounted for the fact that Duke Rennick Vale investigated every member of his household staff as a matter of course. She had not accounted for the fact that he already knew everything the letter claimed to reveal. She was dismissed within the hour. She left Dawnfield Manor in the thin gray light of late afternoon with her bag in her hand and the particular posture of someone who has played a long, careful game and lost it entirely. Tessaly watched from the upper corridor window and felt nothing that resembled triumph. Only a tired, quiet relief, the kind that comes not from winning but from surviving. Polly appeared at her elbow. "It is over," she said softly. "This part of it," Tessaly said. Polly looked at her sideways. "What do you mean?" Tessaly did not answer. She was not entirely sure herself what she meant. Only that the word over felt too simple for everything that remained unresolved. For the things that had been building in the corridors and drawing rooms and quiet exchanges of Dawnfield Manor that had nothing to do with dismissed maids or anonymous letters. She returned to her duties. The following days settled into something that resembled, for the first time since her arrival, actual peace. Mrs. Dunwick ran the household with calm authority. The remaining staff found their footing in the new order. Tessaly moved through the manor with a freedom she had clearly not permitted herself before, taking meals in the dining room rather than her bedroom, spending mornings in the library, appearing in the garden on dry afternoons with her journal open in her lap and her face turned toward the weak autumn sun. Tessaly watched this transformation with a feeling she could not entirely name. Something warm and slightly aching, the way it feels to watch something broken slowly remember what it was before. She and Tessaly continued their mornings. The tea, the reading, the arguments about ideas that started as small disagreements and sometimes grew into 40-minute debates that neither of them wanted to end. Ottilie had a mind like a very well-organized and slightly dangerous library, full of things that surprised you when you pulled them from the shelf. One morning, 11 days after Greta's dismissal, Ottilie set her book down and looked at Tessaly with the particular expression she wore when she had decided to say something she had been considering for some time. "He watches you," Ottilie said. Tessaly continued straightening the window drape. "I am aware. Not the way he watches staff," Ottilie said. "You know that." "Ottilie, I am not a child," Ottilie said. "And I am not blind. I have watched him for 20 years and I know every version of his face. The one he has when you are in the room is not a version I have seen before." Tessaly turned from the window. "It does not matter what his face does. I am a maid in his household. That is the full length and width of what I am here." Ottilie looked at her steadily. "That is not the full length and width of what you are anywhere," she said. "And I think you know that." Tessaly said nothing. Ottilie picked her book back up. "I am only saying what I see," she said mildly, as though she had said something entirely unremarkable, and turned a page. That afternoon, Tessaly was in the garden collecting the last of the outdoor furniture cushions before the rain arrived, stacking them on the stone terrace in quick, efficient movements, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. The grounds were quiet and gray and smelled of wet earth and approaching winter. She heard footsteps on the terrace behind her. She turned. Duke Rennick stood at the top of the terrace steps in his coat with his hands in his pockets, looking at her with that expression she had catalogued and failed to fully interpret across 7 weeks of living in his house. He was not supposed to be here. He was supposed to be in the North Library reviewing the estate accounts with his solicitor. She knew his schedule the way all the staff knew it, not from any personal interest but because his movements dictated the rhythm of the household's day. "You are supposed to be in the North Library," she said. "The accounts are finished," he said. He did not move from the top of the steps. "I came to find you." Tessaly set the cushion she was holding down on the stack and looked up at him. The wind moved across the garden, cold and direct, pulling loose a strand of her hair that she did not reach up to fix. "Why?" she asked. He came down the terrace steps slowly and stopped a few feet from her. Up close, in the flat gray outdoor light, he looked more human than he did inside the manor, where the architecture and the portraits and the weight of the house itself seemed to press a certain formality onto everything and everyone within it. "I owe you something," he said. "You dismissed the people responsible," she said. "You believed me when you did not have to. You investigated my record before allowing accusations to stand. You have already paid whatever debt existed." "That is not what I am talking about," he said. She waited. "I have been trying," he said carefully, "to find the correct way to say something for several weeks. I have not been able to find it. I have decided that there may not be a correct way, and that the search for one is simply delay dressed in respectable clothing. Despite everything, despite the cold and the impending rain and the cushion stack and the 7 weeks of carefully maintained professional distance, something moved through Tessaly that she did not suppress fast enough. A warmth, brief and involuntary, that reached her face before she could direct it elsewhere. "Say it then," she said. He looked at her directly. No management of expression, no controlled surface, just his actual face, which was, without all of its usual architecture, surprisingly open. "You came to this house with nothing," he said. "And in the space of a single morning you saw something wrong and walked toward it when every other person in that corridor turned away. You protected my sister when I was not here to do it myself. You gave her back something I did not know she had lost." He paused. "And you did all of it without asking for a single thing in return." Tessaly held his gaze. "I did not do it for return," she said. "I know," he said. "That is precisely the point." The wind came across the garden again, stronger this time, and above them the sky had darkened with the arriving rain. Neither of them moved. Tessaly told me something this morning, he said. She said that you believe the length and width of what you are in this house begins and ends with your position as a maid. Tessaly felt something tighten in her chest. Tessaly should attend to her books. She also said, he continued undeterred, that you are wrong about that. And my sister, as I suspect you already know, is very rarely wrong about anything. The first drop of rain landed on the stone terrace between them. Then another. Tessaly looked at him for a long moment. This man who had walked down from his terrace steps and stood in the beginning of rain to say something he had spent weeks trying to find the right words for. This man whose sister had called him protective in ways that felt like walls and who was standing here, in front of her, with no wall visible anywhere. What do you want, Rennick? She said. His name. Not his title. His name, the way Tessaly said it, plainly and without ceremony. He heard it. She saw him hear it, and saw the slight shift in his expression that it caused. I want you to stop believing that who you are is limited by where you began, he said. I want you to understand that what I see when I look at you has nothing to do with your position in this household and everything to do with you specifically. And I want, he said more quietly, to have a great deal more conversations with someone who tells me the truth without apology and argues with my sister about books and walks into corridors where no one else will walk. The rain was falling properly now. Neither of them had moved toward shelter. That is a great deal to want, Tessaly said. Her voice was steady. Her heart was not. I am aware, he said. I am asking anyway. I seem to be making a habit of that with you. She remembered saying yes the last time he had asked her to trust him. She remembered what that yes had cost her and what it had returned. She looked at him, standing in the rain in his good coat, asking anyway. Then I suppose, she said slowly, you will need to give me time. Something happened to his face. Not the small crack, not the brief shift. Something genuine and unhurried and entirely without performance. I have nothing but time, he said. And Dawnfield Manor, as I understand it, is going to require a great deal of rebuilding. Tessaly looked at him for one more moment. Then she bent down, picked up the top cushion from the stack, and held it out to him. He took it without hesitation. Then we had better start, she said. They carried the cushions in from the rain together, and from the upper east window, a girl in a wheelchair watched them cross the terrace with a journal open in her lap and something on her face that had been missing from it for a very long time. Not hope exactly, though hope was part of it. More like the specific and quiet joy of someone who had watched a story she had not dared to wish to begin to write itself, line by careful line, in the house that had once only known how to take things from her. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Tessaly did not reach for her pen. She simply watched, and she smiled.